tiny ones. I'll take care of you.
Out in the far reaches of the Arizona desert, where the land looks so empty it almost feels forgotten by time, a lone rancher kicked up dust on a battered pickup headed toward a property he bought for pennies. Folks in town said the place was worthless, nothing more than a patch of sunburned dirt and wind-blown shrubs. But the desert has a habit of hiding truths beneath its silence. And on his very first walk across that barren ground, he stumbled onto something no one expected. 3 tiny, starving survivors who shouldn't have been alive at all. They were weak, shaking, barely holding on. Yet in their eyes flickered a stubborn spark that refused to go out. What were they doing there? Who abandoned them? And why did this forgotten land seem to be holding its breath, as if guarding a secret waiting to break open? This is the astonishing story of how a worthless desert property ignited one of the most heart-stirring journeys the West has ever whispered about. And you're hearing it here on MR, West Legends. If stories from the wild frontier move you, stick around. Hit like, tap subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves a good Western legend. It helps this channel grow, and it keeps these powerful stories alive for the folks who still believe the West has a few secrets left. The road that led to the rancher's new property wasn't really a road at all. It was more like a suggestion drawn into the sand by tired wagon wheels 100 years earlier. Every mile he drove, the desert seemed to swallow a little more of the world behind him. The cell signal vanished first, then the last trace of pavement. Then the feeling that this land had ever been meant for people at all. The rancher, Cole Anders, wasn't the type to be rattled by emptiness. He'd spent most of his life working cattle in places so wide open they made a man feel like a grain of dust floating on God's breath. But even for someone like him, this stretch of Arizona felt different, too quiet, too still. Like the earth itself was holding its secrets in the shade of the sun. He parked his pickup near an old wooden post that barely stood anymore. Someone, years back, had tried to stake the boundary line with scrap lumber and rusted nails. One tap from the wind, and the post leaned like it was too tired to care. Cole stepped out into the scorched air, the heat hitting him like the breath of a furnace. A few lizards scattered across the rocks, vanishing into cracks before he could even blink. This was the property he bought for $25, $25, less than the price of a meal at a roadside diner. Folks in town laughed when he told them about the deal. Cole, you didn't buy land, the feed store clerk said. You bought a sunburn. Another rancher slapped him on the back and snorted. Ain't nothing out there but thirsty dirt and old ghosts. Cole didn't argue. He didn't buy the land for cattle or crops or any dream of turning profit. He bought it because something in him wanted a patch of ground that was his alone, even if it was the roughest, loneliest patch in the state. Sometimes a man needs a place to breathe where nobody else is watching. He walked the boundary line, kicking up little clouds of dust with every step. The desert stretched in every direction, a sea of golden sand broken by clusters of mesquite and the occasional jagged outcropping of rock jutting up like bones from the earth. Far off, the mountains shimmered under the heat, their shapes wavering like spirits dancing between this world and the next. Most people saw emptiness. Cole saw possibility. But possibility didn't explain the strange pull he felt the moment he set foot on the property. It was subtle at first, a prickling on the back of his neck. A sense that he wasn't as alone as he looked. Animals, maybe. Coyotes, jackrabbits. Creatures that watched from the brush, wary and unseen. He told himself that was all it was. Just the desert taking a good long look at him. Still, something kept nudging him a few steps farther, as if the land wanted to show him something. He followed the feeling toward a shallow dip in the terrain. It wasn't deep enough to be a canyon or even a proper wash, just a natural fold in the landscape where shadows pooled like water during the hottest hours. Down in that fold, the heat softened and the world fell quiet in a way that made his heart beat a little slower. Cole scanned the ground out of habit, looking for tracks. Out here, tracks meant life and life meant stories. Even the smallest print could tell a man more than most people ever did. That's when he heard it, not a growl. Not a warning, a faint, trembling cry. He froze. The sound came again, just barely there, thin as glass. Cole's instinct sharpened in an instant. Hurt animal, young, weak, maybe caught in a snare left behind by some irresponsible hunter, maybe injured, maybe something worse. The desert wasn't merciful. It didn't give second chances. If something was crying out here, it was close to its end. Cole moved quickly, stepping down into the dip until he reached the shadowed center. The smell hit him first. Dry fur, fear, hunger woven so deeply into scent that it made his chest tighten. He rounded a cluster of thorn bush and saw movement. 3 tiny shapes, barely bigger than his boots. For a moment, he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. They were alive, but only just. Their ribs showed through thin skin, their legs trembling as if they'd forgotten how to stand. Their coats were matted and dust-caked, their eyes far too large for their narrow faces. 3 miniature horses, foals, starving, abandoned. Cole felt the air leave his lungs. The foals stared at him with a mix of fear and fragile hope, the kind of hope born only from creatures that know yet that the world can be cruel. One of them tried to step forward, but buckled halfway, catching itself with a tiny whinny that tore through the silence like a plea. He knelt slowly, careful not to spook them. "Well," he murmured, voice softened by something he didn't expect to feel, "what in the world happened to you little ones?" There were no tracks besides theirs. No signs of a mare, no wagon marks, no human footprints. It was as if they had appeared from thin air, delivered to the desert by some unseen hand. That didn't make sense. Nothing in the desert simply appeared. Everything had a story, even the wind. He looked around again, scanning for anything he might have missed. The land was empty, too empty. As if it wanted him to focus on the 3 fragile lives in front of him and nothing else. Cole felt the pull again, stronger this time, tugging not at his senses, but at something deeper. A quiet voice inside him whispered that this wasn't chance, that he hadn't come here for peace or solitude or some silly dream of owning land. The desert had brought him here for them.
For the 3 tiny survivors clinging to life on ground everyone else had given up on. A mistake? A miracle? A warning? He didn't know. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. If he walked away, the desert would finish what starvation had started. He reached for his canteen. "Easy now," he said. "Let's get you 3 a fighting chance." As the smallest foal nudged its nose toward the water, Cole felt something shift in the air, almost like the land had exhaled. The property wasn't worthless. It wasn't abandoned. It wasn't empty. It had been waiting. And it had chosen him. The smallest foal's muzzle trembled as it reached for the canteen, its breath so faint that Cole could barely feel it against his hand. He tilted the water carefully, letting a thin stream trickle over its tongue. The foal lapped at it weakly, body shaking with each swallow, like even drinking was a battle it wasn't sure it could win. The other 2 watched with wide, hollow eyes, their legs braced as if standing was a decision they had to remake every second. Cole's heart tightened. He'd seen animals in rough shape before, but nothing like this. These weren't creatures that had simply wandered too far from their herd. They were survivors of something crueler, something strange. Something that didn't fit neatly inside the usual patterns of desert hardship. He glanced at the sky. The sun was sliding west, the heat starting to ease but the shadows growing longer. Nightfall wasn't far, and night in this part of Arizona wasn't kind. Coyotes prowled. Snakes slipped between rocks. The temperature dropped so sharply it could shock a weakened animal into giving up. These foes wouldn't last the night out here. Cole brushed a hand over his jaw, feeling the grit of desert dust clinging to his beard. He did quick math in his head. He had a little feed in the truck. Not much. Definitely not the kind designed for babies this small. And he had no trailer, no way to carry them easily. His ranch was miles away, and these little ones could barely stand. He had a choice to make. Walk away and let the desert handle things the way it always did, or try something risky and backbreaking to give them a chance. The kind of choice that separates people into two kinds. Those who say, "It's not my problem," and those who kneel in the dirt beside 3 dying foals and decide, "It is now." Cole stood and took a slow breath. "All right," he said softly. "We're not doing this here. Not tonight." He moved toward the nearest foal, keeping his hands low and his movements calm. The little creature flinched at first, legs trembling, but it didn't back away. Cole slipped his arms under its belly, surprised by how feather-light it felt. Tiny hooves dangled. The foal didn't struggle. It was too weak for that. He carried it to the truck and set it gently in the truck bed, laying an old canvas tarp beneath it. Then he went back for the second one. This one tried to nuzzle his chest as he lifted it, like a child clinging to the first safe thing it had seen in days. The gesture hit him harder than he expected. "Easy, partner," he murmured. "You're safe now." The third foal was the strongest of the 3. It could still stand, even if barely. But its eyes told another story, a deeper worry, as if it had been the one watching over the others and now didn't know how to stop. Cole crouched in front of it. "You did good," he said. "Let me take it from here." When he lifted the third foal, it let out a soft cry, not fear, more like relief, and rested its head against his shoulder. By the time he had them all secured in the bed of the truck, lined with blankets and cushioned with spare feed sacks, the sun had dipped low enough to cast long, eerie shadows across the desert floor. The whole landscape glowed in reddish gold, like the earth itself was on fire. Cole looked out over the barren land that supposedly had nothing to offer. Yet here it was, offering him 3 lives to save. He climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The truck groaned as if annoyed by the sudden responsibility. Cole chuckled dryly. "Don't complain," he muttered to it. "We're all doing something crazy today." He eased down the worn trail, the suspension creaking with each bump. Behind him, he heard a faint whinny. He checked the mirror. All 3 foals were huddled close, their tiny heads lifting with each jolt. "Hang in there, little ones," Cole whispered. The desert darkened as he drove. The temperature dropped. A chorus of distant coyote howls echoed across the rocks. Each sound made him press the gas a little harder. He kept glancing in the mirror, making sure the foals were still with him, still breathing, still fighting. They were small, yes. Fragile, yes. But something about them didn't feel accidental. Like they were part of a bigger story the land had stitched together long before he ever came along. 2 hours later, his ranch lights came into view, glowing soft and steady against the dark horizon. Cole felt his breath ease for the first time since he'd heard that faint cry in the wash. He pulled into the yard and jumped out before the engine even stopped rumbling. He grabbed a lantern and hurried to the truck bed. The foals were curled together, eyes half closed but still conscious. Still alive. Cole exhaled slowly, grateful. He carried them one by one into his feed shed, the warmest place he had. He laid extra bedding on the floor, set up heat lamps, mixed a makeshift bottle formula using the limited supplies he had, and hoped it'd be close enough to keep their bodies going until morning. The smallest foal was the first to drink. It latched onto the bottle with surprising willpower, tiny throat moving as it swallowed. The other 2 followed, slow but determined. Cole stayed with them for hours, feeding them in turns, rubbing their sides to stimulate warmth, whispering encouragement like they could understand every word. Somewhere in those long hours, as he watched their chests rise and fall in fragile sleep, a strange truth settled into him. This wasn't just rescue. It felt like a handoff. As if someone, or something, had placed them in his path on purpose. He sat back against the shed wall and watched the 3 tiny bodies curled under the heat lamps. "Who left you out there?" he asked the quiet room. "And why here? Why my land?" The desert offered no answers. But Cole felt a certainty building, a sense he couldn't shake. Tomorrow he'd go back. Back to that dip in the land. Back to where the foals had been waiting. There were questions buried out there. And the desert didn't bury anything without reason. He didn't know it yet, but that choice, to return, to search, to push deeper, would unravel a trail of secrets stretching far beyond those 3 starving foals. It would change how folks spoke his name. And it would carve his story into the legend of the West. Morning came slow and pale, the kind of sunrise that seemed unsure if it wanted to break the horizon at all. Cole had barely slept. Every hour through the night, he had checked on the foals, feeding them, adjusting the heat lamps, making sure their breaths stayed steady. Exhaustion pulled at him, but something stronger kept him moving, an instinct that told him their arrival wasn't just misfortune. It was invitation. He stepped into the shed just as the light crept in. The smallest foal lifted its head weakly. The others followed, eyes soft but brighter than the night before. They were still fragile, but a spark was returning. That spark mattered more than anything the desert had tried to take from them. Cole crouched beside them. "You 3 have the stubbornness of old cowhands," he said quietly. "Good. You'll need it." He fed them again, checking each little belly for warmth, each ribcage for steady movement. When he was satisfied they were stable, he stood, grabbed his hat, and headed outside. There was no time to waste. Whatever had happened out there in that wash, whatever had left 3 miniature horses alone, it wasn't the kind of thing he could shrug off. The desert didn't create mysteries. It only revealed the ones people tried to hide. He saddled his old gelding, Dusty, loaded extra water, rope, a first aid kit, and a handful of supplies. As he mounted up, Dusty tossed his head, sensing the tension in Cole's shoulders. "I know," Cole murmured, patting his neck. "I don't like the feeling either." They set out toward the barren property with the sun still low behind them. The air was crisp at first, but it warmed quickly, a reminder that the desert didn't wait for anyone. As he rode, Cole replayed the day before in his mind. The tracks. The silence. The foal's condition. The complete absence of any mare. No hoofprints leading in or out. And that strange, persistent pull he'd felt, like the land itself had been tugging at him. It gnawed at him. Nothing about it fit the patterns of ranch life, or even the unpredictable wildness of the desert. When he finally reached the property line, Dusty paused, ears twitching. Cole felt it too, something off. Not danger exactly, but attention, as if the ground was waiting to see what he'd do next. "All right," Cole whispered. "Show me." He dismounted and walked toward the wash, the place where the foals had been lying in the shade. The desert was silent, except for the soft crunch of his boots against sand and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Down in the dip, the shadows looked the same. The thorn bushes looked the same. The ground even seemed undisturbed, though Cole knew that was impossible. He'd carried 3 foals out of here. They'd left marks. Imprints. Something. He knelt and sifted the sand between his fingers. Wind had come through overnight, smoothing out the ground, erasing the evidence. But the desert didn't erase everything. Cole scanned the area carefully, moving slowly, eyes searching for the smallest sign. Then he found it. A single hoofprint. Larger than the foal's. Much larger. A mare's size. But it wasn't fresh. The edges were softened, worn down. Days old, maybe more. Cole frowned. A mare had been here. But why had she left? Why had she abandoned her young? Horses don't do that unless forced. Unless something pushed them apart. He stood and looked outward across the land. The barren stretch, the jagged rocks, the wide emptiness, it all looked harmless. But that was the trick of the desert. Anything dangerous out here didn't advertise. It hid in stillness. It waited. Cole scanned the horizon again, then turned his attention to a nearby rock formation he hadn't checked before. Something about its shape felt unnatural. Too jagged. Too rigid. Like something had broken it recently. He approached slowly. As he got closer, he saw scratch marks along the rock's surface, deep ones. Long, erratic. Not from weather. Not from brush. And not from horses. His pulse quickened. Coyotes? Maybe in a pack? maybe desperate enough to attack a mare and chase her from her young? Possible. But the marks were too high. Too deliberate. And something else. Cole felt it before he understood it, a faint vibration in the ground beneath his boots. He crouched and pressed his palm to the earth. A hum. Subtle. Almost like the thrum of distant machinery. But deep. Buried. "What the hell is under here?" he whispered. He stood, scanning the area again. Far off, maybe half a mile from where the foals had been found, something metallic caught a sliver of sunlight. A quick, sharp reflection. Then it vanished. He tightened Dusty's reins and led him in that direction, keeping his steps quiet. As he got closer, the hum grew stronger, not loud, but persistent, like something hidden beneath the ground was running, functioning, alive in its own way. Then he saw it. A piece of metal, no bigger than a dinner plate, embedded in the ground, half covered by sand. It wasn't old. It wasn't rusted. And it wasn't anything that belonged out in a forgotten desert wash. Cole brushed the sand away. The metal plate was smooth, circular, and cold to the touch despite the rising heat. Strange symbols were etched into the surface, not letters, not brands, nothing familiar. "What in God's name is this?" Before he could examine it further, Dusty snorted and jerked back sharply, nearly ripping the reins from Cole's hands. The horse's ears pinned, eyes wide, muscles trembling as if something unseen had brushed past him. Cole stood slowly, scanning the landscape. Nothing moved. No wind. No animals. Not even a whisper. But the air felt like it had changed. Thicker. Charged. Cole backed away from the metal, guiding Dusty with him. Whatever that plate was, whatever was humming under the sand, it didn't belong to ranchers or travelers or any normal piece of this land. He reached the wash again, but before leaving, he knelt where the foals had lain. He expected to feel nothing. Just sand, warm from the sun. Instead, it felt cooler. Fresher. As if the ground itself remembered them. A realization settled in his mind, heavy and unwelcome. Those foals hadn't been left behind by accident. They had been driven to that spot. Placed. Hidden. And the thing that had driven them wasn't gone. It was still here. He looked toward the metal plate buried beneath the sand, then toward the horizon stretching endlessly around him. The desert wasn't trying to show him a miracle. It was warning him. And whatever truth was buried out there was about to reshape more than his quiet life on a ranch. It was going to drag him into something larger, older, and far more dangerous than he could have imagined. Cole turned Dusty toward home, his jaw set. He had 3 lives depending on him. And the desert wasn't done revealing what they meant. By the time Cole returned to the ranch, the sun had climbed high, turning the sky into a white-hot anvil hanging over the desert. Sweat slid down his back, and Dusty's flanks were damp from the hard ride. But none of that mattered. Cole's mind was locked on the buried metal plate, the scratch marks in the rock, and the hum, God, that hum, that vibrated beneath the sand like something alive. He unsaddled Dusty, gave him water, and headed straight for the shed. The foals lifted their heads as he entered. Their eyes were brighter still, their bodies a touch steadier. The smallest even let out a soft, tired whicker as if greeting him. Cole felt the tightness in his chest loosen a little. "At least someone around here thinks I'm doing something right," he murmured. He knelt beside them, checking each one, running his hands along their sides, feeling the faint strength returning to their ribs. Relief washed over him, but it didn't settle. Not fully. Not with the image of that metal plate burning in his mind. He sat back on his heels. "Where'd you 3 come from?" he whispered. The foals blinked back at him, innocent, unaware of the mystery wrapped around their tiny hearts. Cole fed them again, stayed with them a while, then stood and stepped outside, needing space to think. The desert stretched around him, wide and quiet, but for the first time, he didn't trust that silence. It felt like listening. Watching. He glanced back toward the property, toward the place where he felt the earth shift beneath his boots. The land had secrets. That much was clear. And if he didn't uncover them, He wasn't sure he'd be able to protect the foals from whatever had driven them out of hiding in the first place. By late afternoon, Cole loaded his pack again. More water. More rope. A small shovel. A crowbar. Even an old revolver he hadn't fired in years. Not because he wanted trouble. Because something in his gut told him trouble was already watching him. He saddled Dusty once more. "We're going back," he said. "And this time, we're digging until we know what's under there." Dusty snorted, unhappy but obedient. Cole patted his neck. "I know. But we can't turn our backs on this." They rode into the deepening dusk. The sky shifted into orange and violet, the air cooling, the desert's edges softening. But Cole kept his eyes sharp. He wasn't about to let anything catch him off guard. When they reached the property, the hum beneath the ground seemed louder than before. Not loud enough to hear with his ears, but he felt it in his bones. In his teeth. Like a pressure. A presence. Cole tightened his grip on the reins. "Here we go." He dismounted and walked toward the metal plate. Dusty refused to follow, planting his hooves in the sand and trembling. Cole let the reins fall. He wouldn't force the animal closer. He knelt beside the plate and brushed more sand away. The symbols shimmered faintly in the fading light, glowing for just a moment before dimming again. Cole froze. "That wasn't the sun," he whispered. "You're doing that on your own." He swallowed hard and reached out. His fingertips brushed the surface. A blast of cold shot up his arm. Not pain. Not electricity. Something older. Something that felt like memory, like echoing voices trapped beneath time. Cole jerked back, gasping. "What are you?" He stared at the metal, his pulse pounding. The ground beneath him vibrated again, stronger, as if the plate had sensed him. A warning? A call? He wasn't sure. But he knew he couldn't leave it buried. He grabbed the shovel. And he dug. The sand gave way quickly, looser than expected, almost like something had disturbed it recently. With each shovelful, the hum deepened. The metal plate widened into a larger surface, circular, smooth, perfectly crafted. Too perfect for any ranch, any homestead, any miner to have left here. Cole kept digging. 3 feet down, the ground changed. The sand gave way to hard, black material, smooth as stone, cold as shadow. Cole tapped it with the shovel. A hollow sound. Something was beneath him. Something large. He cleared a wider circle, revealing more of the structure. It wasn't a plate. It was a hatch. A sealed door embedded in the desert floor. Cole wiped his brow, staring down at the thing. Why is there a door in the middle of nowhere? He looked around. Nothing but empty desert. Empty silence. But the moment he looked away, the hum surged again, throbbing, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The hatch vibrated faintly under his hand. Something's alive down there, Cole breathed. Or something's running. He looked at the symbols again. Not letters. Not numbers. But suddenly, he recognized something else. They matched the shape of the scratch marks on the rocks. Not scratches. Not claw marks. Symbols. Carved by something intelligent. Something that had been here long before he arrived. A chill spread through him. What have I stepped into? Before he could think too far, a sound froze him in place. Footsteps. Soft. Deliberate. Behind him. Cole spun, hand flying to the revolver at his hip. Standing at the edge of the wash was something he had not expected to see, and yet, as soon as he saw it, he understood the truth he'd been circling around all along. A creature. Tall. Thin. Pale as the moon. Eyes dark and deep. Its body shimmered slightly in the fading light, like heat haze wrapped around a shape not meant for this world. The same symbols etched on its skin. Cole didn't move. Neither did the creature. For a long moment, the desert held its breath. Finally, it raised a hand. Slow. Gentle. Not threatening. Cole held his ground. The creature pointed past him, to the hatch. Then toward the direction of his ranch. Then to the sky. Cole understood none of it literally, but the meaning landed anyway. The foals weren't abandoned. They weren't lost. They were hidden. Protected. The desert had given them to him not by chance, but out of need. Someone, or something, wanted them found. Something this creature was either fleeing from, or fighting against. Cole lowered the revolver. Just slightly. "What are they?" he whispered. "Why give them to me?" The creature stepped back, fading into shadow. Its outline softened. Dissolved. And in seconds it was gone, leaving only the whisper of wind behind. Cole turned back to the hatch. A decision stood before him. Open the door. Face whatever truth lay beneath the desert. Or walk away and pretend this was nothing more than a strange day in the middle of nowhere. But when he pictured the 3 tiny foals curled together in his shed, fragile and trusting, he knew the choice had already been made. He rested his palm on the hatch. The symbols glowed. The circular door cracked open. A rush of cool air rose from the depths, carrying a scent he didn't recognize, something metallic, ancient, and powerful. Cole tightened his jaw. "For them," he whispered. And he stepped inside. That moment would mark the beginning of a legend. A tale whispered across ranches, saloons, lonely deserts, and wide-open skies. A story told and retold by channels like MR, West legends for generations to come. The man who bought a worthless piece of land for pennies, only to discover it was guarding a secret the desert itself had kept hidden for 100 years. And the 3 tiny lives that led him into the heart of its mystery. The truth beneath the sand. The real beginning of the story.